Scott Frost has his non-conference schedule set for football, and UCF basketball comes oh so close yet again.
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. Joining me, as he does multiple times a week, my good friend Andrew Gluco from The Last Word on Sports. First word on this topic, Andrew, UCF football's non-conference is set for 2025. They have got North Carolina A&T. They've got Jacksonville State, and they face off versus multiple Super Bowl winning champion Bill Belichick. I love this matchup for UCF and Scott Frost here. I don't think there's much we can say about North Carolina A&T and Jacksonville State. No shade to them. But facing off against Bill Belichick in the non-conference is primetime TV.
Oh, absolutely. And all of these games are at home. So you have the benefit of the home schedule being built out. Obviously, we don't know how the conference slate is going to work. We know who, we know where, we don't know when. And that'll be coming up, within the next probably month or so, because they got to get this locked down, and so people can start making travel plans and all the other stuff. But game one is Thursday, August 28th. UCF will host Jacksonville State. On the surface, if you just look at the numbers, this is a good game for UCF. Jacksonville State, reigning Conference USA champions, actually played at the Cure Bowl in Orlando. But take a step back, they lost their head coach, Rich Rodriguez, left for West Virginia. So this is a whole new team. A lot of players left through the portal after Rich Rod got hired away to go back to the Mountaineers. So this is not the same team that won Conference USA. This is kind of a shell of themselves. So this is actually plays well for UCF because they're a new team too, but they've got a lot more talent. Then fast forward a week, Saturday, September 6th is North Carolina A&T. When this game was first talked about, there was the hope that the Aggies would be a more competitive program. Since joining the CAA, this team has not been competitive. They're coming off back-to-back one-win seasons. I don't have high expectations for A&T, which was a really good HBCU that played in the MEAC until a handful of years ago. Went undefeated back, I think, around the time UCF went undefeated. Around the 2017 time. So this was a good program, has fallen on some rough times. We'll see what they bring. Then you got Saturday, September 20th. 2 weeks later, that's the big one against North Carolina. I expect TV is going to suck that one up. Obviously it's in Orlando, so it's going to be part of the Big 12, package, which is either going to be on Fox or ESPN, family of networks. I'm pretty sure it's going to be on some sort of national televised
they're not going to miss a chance
point.
to get Bill Belichick on national TV at all, right?
No, they're going to get a lot of chances. So UCF's got a very realistic chance to go 3-0 to open the season. Once again, Mac Brown struggled. He's gone. This is a whole new team. And this, you're talking about, Bill Belichick. When's Bill Belichick coached in college? This is a very different animal. We don't know what we're going to get.
Well, what we do know is he's going to get the control, right? And so Nick Saban talked about this when he left the Dolphins. He talked about the control factor, and he did a recent interview where, in talking with his agent, he said, look, man, he essentially admitted that leaving LSU was one of the biggest mistakes that he made. So giving Bill Belichick, putting him in the control type environment. Now he's with NIL. This might be a great thing here because you got somebody who's already used to managing large salaries and egos. And I don't know. I think it's going to be a great fit down there. But if you're Scott Frost, logging a win versus him propels your program forward. Now, Andrew, we're talking about the non-conference here, and fortunately for us, just so happens to be the first 3 games of the season. They maybe have a game sandwiched between North Carolina A&T and North Carolina.
Possibly. Obviously, we don't know yet. All those are to be announced, but they do have an open date on the 13th, which could go either way. It could go by, or it can go with a conference opener. UCF did start their season early last year in the conference on September 15th, I believe it was. They were they and TCU, that was the first conference game of the year for the Big 12. So, I mean, it's possible that UCF is opens the conference schedule again, but we know the teams and we know the locations.
Absolutely.
We have road games on the schedule already, as far as where Baylor, BYU, Cincinnati, Kansas State, and Texas Tech. And then UCF has home games against Houston, Oklahoma State, Kansas, and Rich Rodriguez in West Virginia. So as we know, every year it switches back and forth between 4 home games in conference and 5 home games in conference. This year is a 4, so they make up with the 3 out of conference games. So fans are going to have a nice full schedule of 7 home games this season, and then 5 on the road. So, there's no shortage of football to be had in Orlando.
9 conference game schedule, Andrew. Look, the non-com is important, especially in Scott Frost's first year. We talk a lot about what's a reasonable expectation for year 1. Is it 6 games? Is it 7 games? Well, you've got 2 wins toward that goal guaranteed in that non-conference, hopefully. Knock on wood.
Don't jinx it now.
North Carolina A&T and Jacksonville State. And if you can get a win versus North Carolina, logging that Power 4 win, I think is important. And then doing it on a big stage with everybody watching does wonders for recruiting. So interesting conversation here, I think, when you're talking about the schedule. Now, once they get the scheduled date set, we're going to revisit this conversation, talking about that home away slate and what UCF has to do in stretches next year. But certainly the non-conference is important. But look, football isn't the only thing going on. UCF on the hardwood is so close to something special. But yet again, they fall to Kansas. We're going to talk about what happened to the Knights versus the Jayhawks right after a quick word from our sponsor. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Game Time, Andrew. The NFL playoffs are on. The Bills failed to beat Mahomes again. The memes are epic. And there's lots of great college basketball going on. Are you attending any games here in the near future?
Well, I mean, it's my busy time of year, so it's hard to get to a game. I hope to be able to get to maybe something at the end of February, but we'll see.
Well, if you do choose to go, do it with our friends at Game Time. This year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments with their new feature, Game Time Picks. It filters out all the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats, so you can focus on what matters most, being there. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. UCF falls to Kansas in another close one. This was a hotly contested battle. I watched every second of this, Andrew, and I got to tell you, I'm going to jump right to what irked me was execution down the stretch. You and I, we text during the game all the time, and you texted me. You had an interesting comment. You said you felt like it was too much hero ball going on down the stretch for UCF. Care to expound, my friend?
Well, I think this comes back to players starting to get tired. When you look at the box score, no player played more than 7 minutes off the bench for the Knights. So, I mean, this was basically a very starter-heavy game. I mean, Keyshawn Hall played 39 minutes out of 40. 4 out of the 5 starters had at least 33 minutes. Darius Johnson and Debo Coleman, 37 apiece. So you're talking players that played a lot of time, and towards the end, you're tiring out. So you're getting a little bit sloppy. The ball control started going down. The amount of passing went down, and players were just throwing things up. They were just trying to make plays happen. but they were not getting set. They were just kind of going rogue, doing their own thing. And that's where hero ball comes into play. You got to stay methodical. You got to stay, in a good mental place. And when you start getting tired, those mistakes start to compound. And, it just shows that Kansas had way more depth than UCF. I mean, UCF punched above their weight class here. And, give the Knights, Johnny Dawkins and those guys a lot of credit. And I'm not talking about like a moral victory thing. They punched above their weight class. They gave them a game, but this was a case where the depth just started to show at the end of it. UCF just could not keep up the onslaught in the second half. I mean, they gave up 50 points in the second half. They have problems with big man defense. Hunter Dickinson, second half, just really started to score at will against UCF. Started making a lot of number of block shots. I mean, UCF got outblocked 7-1. So UCF's inside presence wasn't very strong. Even Mustafa Sham was getting blocked.
Yeah,
they're tired. They're making mistakes. They're not making that extra pass. But again, we expected this game to end up in a loss. We were talking about the upcoming schedule. We were not expecting UCF to win this game. I did not expect UCF to be winning in the second half of this game. I was pleasantly surprised. The fact that we lost by 4 shows they can play with anyone. And this was a road game. That is not an easy place to play.
While we're here, I want to make this point because for viewers at home, it may not be apparent, but something that you see here in the stats that we look at. The UCF led for 21 minutes and 38 seconds of this game versus only 14 minutes and 4 seconds for Kansas. They led at the half. Man, my ears started to really perk up, man, when I saw that they were leading at the half, and I thought, it always, in these games, when you're punching above your weight class, it always comes down to execution down the stretch. Making those field goals at the end, making good shot choices at the end, and the execution down the stretch made me cringe, Andrew. I wanted it so bad for these guys, but they couldn't get over. But I want to go back to something that you talked about when you talked about the minutes played, because the only player that wasn't in the starting lineup that scored a single bucket was Mikey Williams. UCF got 2
and he had
points from the bench. 2 points from the bench. Let me just make sure I say the stats out loud for our listeners on pods. Ivy Curry played 33 minutes. Darius Johnson played 37 minutes. Keyshawn Hall played 39 minutes. Dallin Coleman played 37 minutes. And Mustafa played, Mustafa, did I say it right?
Mustafa Sham.
Mustafa Sham played 27 minutes. No other player on UCF had even double-digit minutes. Depth means everything, I think, when you're, again, punching above your weight class, or you need an absolutely perfect game. Hats off to Keyshawn Hall, man. Listen, my brother has been balling. 34 points, 9 for 19 from the field, and he hit all 11 of his free throws, Andrew. He didn't miss a single one. I just feel like, in a game where you lose by 4 points, the margin for error is clearly very small for this team. But, how do you avoid this if you're UCF? There's still some opportunities left on the schedule to get that marquee win that you and I keep talking about week after week on this show.
Well, it got to the point where it was the Keyshawn Hall show, and he was just carrying the team.
Yeah.
It got to the point where Kansas started to try to double team him, and he would find a way to just deal with it. But again, this comes back to fatigue. The other players were getting tired. I mean, Debo Coleman was largely just not there. 1 of 7 from the field, all 3-point shots, just not effective. Mustafa Sham, 1 of 5 from 3-point range. It's great to see a big man shoot threes, but he needs to make more than 20% of them. Otherwise, don't shoot threes. Simple as that. And,
1 of 5, yeah.
Paul and Darius Johnson. I mean, Darius Johnson does what Darius Johnson does, which is, he makes key 3-pointers. He can score. He can pass the ball. I mean, he went 19 points. We had 4 steals in the game. I mean, he had a very good day. And then, of course, Keyshawn Hall, perfect on his free throws. Very weird style and how he does his free throws, but hey, whatever works. But I think Johnny Dawkins and crew can really take this take this back home, leading up to this little miniature homestand, and then these 3 big games coming up, because UCF is still very much in the talks for NCAA tournament bid.
Yeah. Listen, that's what happens when you play a tough schedule. Even though you may lose some, they consider who you're playing in that discussion. A couple more stats I want to talk about here on the Kansas side: 34 points in the paint, 29 points from their bench. And if you get a little bit more production from your bench, if you're UCF, you maybe win this one and not so close. Remember, they were at Kansas for this one, but you got off 11 more shots than Kansas in this game. 75 shots they took versus only 64, even though you shot it at a lower clip. 13 offensive rebounds, and there were some second chance opportunities there. 13 second chance points off those offensive rebounds. Man, you've just got to find that little extra something, I feel like, in the last few minutes, and you can turn this thing around and maybe close the season strong. Now, they got to play Iowa State one more time down the stretch here. It's going to be interesting to see where they land. But look, next up is BYU, and this is a game that you and I have already talked about. What do they need to do against the Cougars to secure the win and get off the losing stride again? We'll talk about that in our next segment. BYU is up next, my friend. Look, similar to when they played TCU, or anything that ends with a U. I feel like they can get the win here. I think this is a winnable game versus BYU, and I'm looking for the Knights to come home with the victory.
Yeah, BYU is kind of a weird one, because their net ranking is 36, yet they're 1-3 in quad 1 games. So BYU is a bit of almost a fraudulent team, while UCF has that 0 margin of error at this point at 3-6 against quad 1, that's boosting their resume in the tournament talk. BYU, for some reason, at 1-3 against quad 1 with a weaker strength of schedule, is 36th in the net, which I believe falls just into quad 2, since it's a home game for UCF, but still a very valuable game. UCF has 0 margin of error at this point, outside of maybe squeaking by if they lose to Iowa State, but they're going to need some help. They got to win out every other game. BYU's focal point is going to be Richie Saunders, their forward. He's the real threat on this team. As a whole, this team scores just a little bit more than UCF on average by a point and change. So it's pretty even as far as on a team level, but Richie Saunders is easily their best scorer. Averages 15 points a game. As we know, UCF also has a guy who scores over 15 points a game, Keyshawn Hall, up to 18. And then you have the other 2 of the big 3, Darius Johnson, Jordan Ivory Curry, each averaging over 14.5 points a game. But BYU has no one over 12 after that. And we talked about when UCF played TCU, and they lacked a lot, offensive distribution. UCF has 3 guys that can score. These other teams don't, and BYU is no different. BYU has Saunders, and that's really it. If they can contain him, and they got to make sure that he doesn't shoot the 3, because he can hit over 40% in his 3-point shots. They got to blanket him. One of the things that UCF did against Kansas was switch up to a zone coverage, and it worked for a time. If they switch up between a zone and a zone man, I think it could throw off BYU's offense enough to allow UCF to develop momentum and get ahead. As we know, the home court advantage at Additional Financial Arena is really, really tough. We know what the Knight Nation brings, and it's a very loud, raucous crowd. They got the palm fronds. So I think if they can establish a bit of momentum, I think UCF's going to throw off the Cougars and just keep them off balance and get past that, because it's the game after that I think is going to be a little bit more of a challenge, and that's Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Cincinnati, not as good as a win-loss record, but I think they're a better team than BYU. I think BYU's had the benefit of a weaker schedule, especially in the early part of the non-conference. Both have been kind of duds as far as non-conference schedules in the non-conference, but BYU is like the massive cupcake schedule. Cincinnati a little bit tougher, but they got to win these 2 games at home, and then they have to win against Baylor on the road after that.
Yeah, look, projecting down the schedule, you missed some really good opportunities for signature wins here versus Houston. Obviously, the 1-point loss, and then again with Kansas, a game that you led at halftime and let slip away. You've got Iowa State on the schedule, and again they come to UCF for that one. But you're going to have to start to string together wins here down the stretch if you want to impress this committee. If you don't have that marquee win on the schedule here in conference play. So if you're UCF, now like you said, we're still firmly in the conversation. But that will start to shift if you can't string together wins here. Excited to see how it turns out for them, Andrew. I want to thank you for joining me today.
It's the margin of error, man. Before we go, I just want to remind everyone about the bracketologies that are out there right now and where UCF is currently in them. This is as of January 31st, which is when we're doing this recording. So on ESPN, UCF is the last team in, would be part of that first 4, would play. Right now they have them against New Mexico, the Lobos. Then you go to CBS. CBS is actually at UCF is in their most favorable spot as a 10 seed, not one of the last 4 in. But again, guess who's in the first 4 out? BYU. Yep. In fact, ESPN has BYU in the first 4 out too. So this is a big important game. They have it as a 10 seed in CBS against Utah State. UCF last team in for Fox Sports. They're one of the first teams out for team rankings. They're currently outside looking in, and then they're part of the first 4 out on D rating. So you've got 5 bracketologies to look at. 2 of them, they're basically the last team in. 2, they're just on the outside looking in, and then 1, they're in. But again, margin of error very small. They cannot afford any of these losses outside of maybe Iowa State. They really needed to steal this Kansas win because they let that slip through their fingers. They let Houston slip through their fingers. If they don't make it, they're probably almost at this point a lock for the College Football Crown tournament, which is the new tournament that's being done by Fox Sports for members of the Big Ten, Big East, and Big 12.
Yep. Yeah, look, the definition of a team on the bubble, as on
they
the
are
bubble,
definitely a bubble team
as you can get right now. I want to thank you for joining me today, Andrew. Before we get out of here, tell people where they can find you.
You can catch me on Twitter /X or Blue Sky at StatBoyDrew, and you can catch my writing on The Last Word on College Football, a part of The Last Word on Sports family.
Guys, thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. For your second listen, go check out our friends at Locked On Big 12. Our guy Drake Toll leads the conversation in conference realignment news and pulls no punches when it comes to talking about every team in the Big 12, including the UCF Knights. You can find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find us here on Locked On UCF.